Now it works. I just wanted to see if people are awake. Yes. We'll go ahead and give people another minute or two to go ahead and wander on in, and then we'll get started. It was, no. The handheld mic? All right, in the interest of time, and realizing there is a football kickoff at 1 o'clock, which may be of some importance to people, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, my name is Ken Sachs. For those who don't know me, I am the president of the Parish Leadership Council, and I'd like to start by opening with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, come with us today to be here to guide our conversation and our discussion as we discern your future for Lord of Life and its campus ministry. Guide the conversation, lead us to always act in your will and to carry that out here on earth. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about the campus ministry. Before we do that, we sent out on Friday's Lifeline a 14-page, yes, 14 pages of data that we put in a handout. We have printed off copies of that, and Kathy has got them right now. If you have not gotten a copy or want a copy, please raise your hand, and we'll make sure to get you copies of those documents. And just keep your hands raised high, and we'll go ahead and get those to you. Just be patient, since Kathy's only one person. Kathy. She was looking for one. Oh, okay. All right, so today's purpose is to provide the congregation, you, with data and perspectives to help inform the voting that's going to occur next month on October 22nd at the special congregational meeting. Okay, what time is that meeting next month? 11 o'clock. Which location? Here, Clifton. That is correct. I'm going to foot stomp that several times just to make sure that people know where and when it is, so that I can minimize the number of I didn't know conversations that I may have down the road. And the other purpose of today is to answer questions related to the options that we are considering for Lord of Life. Next slide. So these are the topics, because you got to have a overview slide of, I think that's actually required by the PowerPoint gods, that you have to have an overview. So we're going to talk about who we are, why are we here today, the relevant data and highlights, including the survey results. And when I say the survey results, we're not going to be able to provide the written comments that you guys all carefully and thoughtfully wrote on, because there were 222 of them. People who responded. And so we're in the process of pulling that together. That data will be provided in Lifelines this coming Friday with a link to that data. Once we discuss the relevant data, then we're going to talk about the different options that we are going to consider. And then, like I said, we're going to try to answer questions at the end of each section. I ask, please, for those who are watching, for the benefit of those online and those who may have a little more difficulty hearing, we've got a mic set up over here to my left, your right. Please come up and ask your question. We've also got a handheld mic if you're unable to come up, so that we can make sure to ask questions. For today's meeting, I ask one small favor. Let's keep this to questions. Comments about what we think we should be doing, that's going to be for next month's meeting. That's why next month's meeting could be a fairly long one before we do the vote, and we get that. But for today, try to limit your comments to questions that you want to know, and we will do our best to try to answer them. We won't be able to answer all of them. Like I've said before, we're going to have to make this decision on incomplete data. We're not going to have answers to every question that you're going to have, but we're going to try to do our best to answer the questions that you do ask. So, slide. So who are we? You would think that would be kind of obvious. Next slide. We're Lord of Life. We are one congregation in the ELCA, and that is a surprisingly challenging topic for people to understand, that we are one church. Even though we're two facilities, two campuses, we are one church. And that is one thing that we need to keep in the back of our minds through the entire conversations that we have, either here or amongst yourselves outside of this Sunday, and when we meet again next month. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we live our missions through worship, education, outreach and caring ministries, and evangelism. I know that's a scary word for most Lutherans, but that is a key component of what and who we are. And our membership, this is kind of an interesting point that I don't think I realized, that we have members from Alexandria to Culpeper, from Ashburn to Woodbridge, and with online participation, we have worldwide participants. We are really spread out. We are not like most of the churches that I grew up with, where everybody was within about 5 to 7 miles of the campus. That's not the case here. We are spread out, and that we need to keep that in mind when we do our discussions today. Next slide. Our mission. This is our simple mission. Love God, love people, make disciples. Doesn't get any easier than that. Where it becomes hard is the execution of those things. We say that, now can we actually do that? Next slide. So why are we here today? Lord of Life has had a continuing budget shortfall that imperils our mission and ministry as a congregation. Hopefully that does not come as a surprise to anybody in this room or anybody who's watching this video. That's, of course, the purpose of these discussions, is to deal with our ongoing challenges that have imperiled our ability to carry out our mission, because we've got this sword of Damocles hanging over our church's proverbial head of our budget deficit and the mortgage. And so we're here to try to deal with those issues today. So our challenge is to resolve that shortfall. How do we do that while still remaining true to our mission and strengthening our faith and community? And when I'm talking about our budget, I'm using that as both the operating budget, which is what most of your giving goes to, and as well as the principal for the mortgage. So when I use that term, I'm using it to refer to both pots of money. And unfortunately, without a sustainable resolution to our financial challenges in 2024, we could face foreclosure. I know we don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. But we do have to deal with the reality that if we can't pay our principal mortgage, just like the rest of us, we may have problems continuing. Now, fortunately, we are not in immediate danger of that happening. Let me make that very clear to everybody listening. We are not in immediate danger of any foreclosure. We're not even really probably in immediate foreclosure in all of 24 due to the generous donations and pledges that people have made for the capital campaign for next year. But we can't keep kicking this proverbial can down the road. And so that's why we're here today. Slide. So with that, I want to start with, is there any questions before we get started on the data highlights? All right, and with that, I will invite up Kadre, who will start with this area.
Hi everyone, my name is Kadri Kallas-Selek. I'm a member of PLC and serving as treasurer, and I will now give you an overview of our financial situation. Next slide, please. I usually start by saying that here at Lord of Life, when it comes to finances, we have two responsibilities or needs, concerns. And that is, one is to our budget, and I use it in a narrower sense than Ken just referenced it. So when I say budget, I mean the budget, which is our general fund, from which we fund our day-to-day operations. And then our next, of course, equally important responsibility is to serving our mortgage, making our mortgage payments. When it comes to our budget, and again in the narrow sense, the general fund, then we have been running a deficit for several years. For the last 6 years, we ran a deficit 5 years, and those deficits ranged from 6,500 to 45,000 to 100 and 110,000 a year. And of course, that is not sustainable. Our main source of income is envelope offerings, but again, there's a trend that we receive 90% of what we budget. Out of every $100 we budget from envelope income, envelope offerings income, we end up receiving $90. So that's a challenge. Now, next to our mortgage. Mortgage is our second responsibility financially. Our current mortgage balance is just under $4.5 million, and that includes 53,000 of what is deferred interest payments from 2020, when for 3 months in the summer we received a COVID relief from Trivent, and we did not pay our, not principal, not interest either. And that is just now, of course, added to our total remaining obligation. Now, with the mortgage, a couple of changes were made, or one change, I should say, was made about 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, again, when we were kind of starting to face financial challenges. Lord of Life, Doug Wigan, went to Trivent, and we negotiated some temporary relief in the form of reduced mortgage principal payments. And that was negotiated for 5 years. It started in March 2019, and now it will end, that 5-year period will end in the coming March. And that's when our mortgage payments will go up by $11,000 a month, because we start to resuming the full amount of principal. So we go from a $27,000 monthly mortgage payment to $38,000 monthly mortgage payment. And that includes both the principal and the interest. Now, again, as a reminder, the interest is an expense that shows up in our budget. The principal is not. The principal we pay from a dedicated fund. However, it doesn't matter in what fund it is, we need to have those funds. So since our mortgage payment will go up $11,000 starting March next year, that means that, 9 times 11,000, we need to have 100,000 more in funds next year than this year for mortgage. Okay? And so then, of course, on the background of declining revenues, that might be a challenge that we need to overcome. Next slide, please. And so here you have an overview, a longer trend of our income, starting from 2010 to last year. And there are two series there, the blue one and the orange one. The blue numbers show our, you would call it nominal income. And it should be total income, but I think the last 3 years it actually doesn't include our capital campaign income. So that's why I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just want to highlight that even though the downward trend in that blue series may not be as significant, it still is about 20%, right, compared to starting 2010, or when we compare last year's total income, what's reflected here, to 2010's income. However, if we adjust this for inflation, if we adjust this for the fact that money loses value, and if we expressed all of our back income in 2023 dollars, this is how much we would have had, right? So that just really reflects our declining purchasing power of the funds that we receive. So we are really operating with less money. We are able to purchase less services and goods and value for the income that we receive. So that's the bottom line here. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. And now we have our income and expense projections for 2023. The bottom line has improved quite a bit since we started these discussions, and we were afraid that we might have a shortfall to the scale of 200,000. Okay? So I'm going to just, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I'm going to explain what we have done here. So for income, we have taken the actual income, observed actual income from January to August this year, and then we have taken the average of it, exclusive of the month of May, though, because if you remember, in May we received some bigger donations that were pledged, but they were all made in one payment, so we cannot expect that to repeat. So we calculated the average observed for the first 8 months without May, and then we used that to project the income for the rest of the year, for the remaining 4 months, and we also put in a half a month's worth of envelope offerings, which we usually traditionally see in additional giving in December. And we were conservative, we only put in half a month's worth. Okay? Then we also are showing here the actual income from other sources, January to August. We are taking the average of it and showing it for the rest of the year. So that's a projection there as well. And then, of course, the big good news, the big good development since last time that we met, a generous, loyal member of Lord of Life made an offer to match gifts that our members might give and hopefully will give, in addition and over what they have pledged to our general fund for 2023, and up to a total of 50,000. And so we have a number here. We have started to call it the matching challenge. And here we have the number 80,000. Things move fast in a positive way. And so since we prepared this handout on Tuesday or Wednesday, this number has actually gone up. So now we are up to 92,000, and that means that half of that is what our members have already given to the matching challenge, and then all of that has been matched dollar for dollar. Okay? And as Pastor Shannon said, there is a little bit more to go, and then looks like we are going to be in a position to benefit from the entire $50,000 that the member offered as a matching gift. So God is great. Going to expenses, we have here our actual ordinary expenses from January to August. We have done a straight line projection for the remainder 4 months of the year. And we have brought in continuing benevolence payments. So if things look tight, then we told you that, well, that's one place where we may have to make cuts. But our congregation feels strongly about benevolence giving to our synod, to our partner ministries, and so we wanted this to be one of the expense that now that we appear to be in a position to make those payments, that we will make them. So those are brought back in here as well. And then you also see here mortgage interest payments already paid and still to be paid. If we take the income, subtract the expense, we are looking at a deficit of 36,000, much better than we projected earlier this year. Okay, and one more slide, please. Next slide from me. So here is just a bit of background. The size or magnitude of our debt. We are showing here 5 churches, 5 other ELCA churches in Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Synod, who are competing with us in terms of the size of the debt that they have. Well, we are winning, if we like it or no. And there are other churches, of course, ELCA congregations that are carrying debt as well. We are only showing some of the bigger ones who are comparable or somewhat comparable to us with respect to our membership. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say for finances for now. And now, Gail, please, is up next.
Hi, good morning. My name is Gail Jackson, and I'm a member of the PLC, member at large. And I know that what we just heard from Kadri is a lot to digest. And now I'm going to share a little bit of information. It's also, most of this, if not all of it, is in your handout, but we'll talk about it a bit, specifically around membership and attendance for starters, and then about the two different campuses, since that is really key to the vote that we're going to be having in October. So let's just say, here's a point in time, 2022 database. You may wonder, like, how many members do we have? Well, this is what our database for 2022 showed. 903 baptized and confirmed members, some of those out of state, and 444 households. The reality is we are no longer the largest church in the Metro DC Synod. At one point we were. Okay, do you want to go ahead and flip that? All right. But what about attendance trends? And this is really key. Actually, the reality is as we've done some research on this, that most mainstream Protestant churches are seeing a decline in attendance over recent years. And we are right in the boat with them. So it may be easier to see in your handout. It's on page 5 if you wanted to look at it. But just to be clear, the top line, that's the blue line, starting in 2001, and running through 2019 before COVID hit, you see the trend is downward. Total attendance for Lord of Life. The gray line in the middle represents the Fairfax attendance, so attendance at the Fairfax campus. The sort of orange line on the bottom represents the Clifton campus attendance. And unfortunately, it flips over on page 6, but there's a couple details about this. The attendance number for 2020 to 2022 were admitted due to worship changes under COVID. And also in 2003, so some of you have been here as part of Lord of Life since it started. Some maybe only joined a couple of years ago. For some of you, maybe this is your first time visiting with us. So welcome. But what I wanted to say is that in 2003 is when Holy Spirit Church and Lord of Life Church merged. And then in 2008 is when this building actually opened formally, it was completed. And so some of those numbers kind of represent some of those changes that were happening at the time. On the far right in that slide, you'll see there's a yellow and blue bar, and that is just to represent once we started in person in 2023 with the current format, the yellow being what we saw in person in terms of numbers during the summer, and the blue being participation online. But the key here is that we do see that downward trend, I think, in attendance, something to be paying attention to. Okay, now let's talk about, you can go on to the next one. All right, so Ken is going to talk a little bit later about the specific options that are going to be put before the congregation in the October meeting where we're going to vote. But part of that is around like looking at the Clifton campus and looking at the Fairfax campus. So in your handout, you will see on pages 6 through, I think, 8, very specific details that just show what there is in each campus. And that's for you to review on your own. I would guess that some of you may have never been to the other campus. If you're from Clifton, maybe you've never been to Fairfax campus, or maybe you've only been in the sanctuary. Or if you're from Fairfax, well, you're here, or you're online, you may or may not have been to the Clifton campus. I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago. I walked both campuses because while I'd been to both, I'd never really looked in the nooks and crannies, and that was really kind of interesting to get a feel for the differences and the strengths and the areas where we can improve in both campuses. And you'll see later, we're going to provide an opportunity if you wanted to tour a campus, when you'll be able to do that in the next few weeks. If you haven't, like, gone downstairs here at Clifton, or perhaps not at Fairfax, or seen some of the office space. Anyway, what I want to highlight here is just some of the key features that if at the end of the day, if you wanted to say, but what are some of the things that are mostly different between Fairfax and Clifton, or what distinguishes one from the other? Because they're both wonderful campuses. The Fairfax, over 4,000 square feet more finished space than Clifton. It's true. Clifton has more total square feet, but 17,000 of that is unfinished. And it is roughed in for plumbing, et cetera, but the vision was when that campus was built that eventually we'd build out the basement area. There is more capacity for parking and worship at Fairfax and than there is at Clifton, and that is detailed in this handout. Also, Fairfax is older than this campus, by about 17 years in terms of the final, when construction was completed, and the last addition, I think, was done to the Fairfax campus. There are more classrooms at Fairfax for the preschool. There are more offices. There's a larger, more flexible fellowship hall here at Clifton. But the capacity is less, we think, because of the emergency exit issue, but not sure. This is a bigger fellowship hall. More storage space at Fairfax, more restrooms. There's a commercial kitchen here at Clifton, and a full sprinkler system. So you see there are a lot of differences to take in account if you really want to be thinking about, like, ooh, if we were thinking about putting one on the market, what would we want to keep, what would we want to consider, just what do we need to know about, so we're more knowledgeable in making those decisions. The other thing, if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a few things about those campuses. First of all, I want to tell you right out that I made a mistake, and so that number of other ELCA churches in a 5-mile radius, that is my mistake. We will correct that for when we send this handout out again at next Friday's Lifelines. I think we're going to be including that. I miscalculated based on a graphic that I saw. It's actually, the reality is that it's 2 other ELCA churches in a 5-mile radius for Clifton and 5 for Fairfax, right? And one thing that I think is really interesting about that information is that the percent of Lord of Life households that are closest to each campus, we have 25% at Fairfax and 20% closer to Clifton. And that means that 55% of our congregation have another ELCA church closer to them, but they choose to come to Lord of Life. And I think that's a really powerful statement about what we have in terms of community here. And hopefully we can sustain that. And then the other point is that if the communities in which these churches were built are a little different, and there's greater racial diversity in the Clifton surrounding area as you move into Centerville, et cetera, which you may be aware of, but certainly the demographic data from the county show that. Okay. The other thing I want to point to is not on a slide, but page 9 in your handout. And it just says, like, so, okay, where do the members line up against locations? And so the nearest there, 62% of our current members are closer to Fairfax, and 38% are closer to Clifton. So that is also maybe an interesting statistic that you want to consider. And then you also see at the bottom of page 9 how we've broken out the members by age group and nearest location. Actually, we haven't. I think Mike Brondos might have been the one to pull this data. He's been wonderful at gathering a lot of data and sharing it with us. So if you were curious about, well, where what is the demographic in terms of age across Lord of Life? You have that there, as well as alignment to their nearest location. So it's something you might want to refer to later if you want to dig a little deeper into the data that we've provided here. All right. So with that in mind, I'm going to transition back to Kadri. Many of you took the time, and we appreciate that you filled out the survey, and she's going to share those results in more detail.
Next slide, please. First, thank you for everyone who took the time to submit the survey. Well, we stated and articulated this, the purpose of the survey to find out about our members' engagement and attendance patterns now that the worst of the COVID seems to be behind us, and I'm going to say the worst of it, not all of it. And also try to look into what could be the impact of it if we make a decision one way or another in October. If we keep both campuses, if we were to put one or the other on market and sell it. Okay, and so here are the numeric results. As Ken said, we are still working on summarizing and generalizing your comments and your open-ended responses, but the numeric, an overview of the numeric results I will present, and more of it is in your handout. So we received 222 total responses. And in this numeric analysis, only 2019 are included, because 3 came in after we had already run the numbers. And out of those 222, 163 we received online, and 59 on paper. Okay, and so on this slide here you see the responses by age, and the percentages are off, right? If you look carefully, then you realize that the percentages there are not entirely correct. They are close enough that you might be deceived, but those need to be corrected, and I'm going to correct them in the handout. But all in all, you see that we received more responses from older, from middle age, older middle age, and senior persons than from our younger members of congregation. Okay, and let's see. So the age range 13 to 42, 13 to 42. The correct percentages is that the responses from them were 10%. 10% of our responses came from people in the age range 13 to 42. The rest was, and then 90% are by persons 34 years of age and older. 2/3 of the responses are by members who are 59 years and older, 2/3. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind, because we know that our congregation is younger. Well, it's slightly younger. If you look at your handout on page 9, the bottom table there you see the age breakdown. So our members from age 0 to 44, and I know that babies cannot fill out the surveys, but age 0 to 44, they represent 42% of our congregation. So their young voices really are underrepresented here. Okay, so now 28 responses were by families with children. And when we ask which campus do you associate with, if any, then out of those 28, 14 said Fairfax, 8 said Clifton, and 6 said, no, we don't have a primary campus. So these are the families with children. Next slide, please. And yes, we did want to ask this explicit question of our members: do you consider yourself do you have a primary campus? And if yes, then which one? And indeed, almost 90% of respondents, and that's respondents, again, it's not all of our congregation, it's the people who responded, said, yes, I associate more with one campus than the other. And about 10%, the more precise number is 11% said, I don't have a primary campus. And then of those who said, yes, I do have a primary campus, over twice as many have note Fairfax as their primary campus as Clifton. And the percentages are 62 for Fairfax and 27 for Clifton. And interestingly, when you compare this number with the table, the top table on page 9 of your handout, then hey, 62% of our households are closer to Fairfax than to Clifton. So yes, please.
Actually, that graphic is not the right one, and if you look on page 11 of the handout, because that's possible to be
Yes, so the text on the left, it shows with which campus you associate. Do you have a primary campus? Okay.
The graphic is on page, the pie chart for that is on page 11.
Okay.
Not that pie chart, which is possible to be able to keep both campuses.
Okay.
Yeah, what she's saying, for those who are looking at the slides, is that, I'm not sure if my mic's no longer working or still not working. Put a handheld. What it is it's 4.5. It's the chart. Yeah, that chart is the incorrect one.
Okay. Well, I know that the text there does not go along with the chart, if that's what you mean. Okay? So the text says, which is your primary campus? The chart talks about a different topic to which I'm going to go next, which is how would you behave if we keep both campuses? Okay? So let's now move to that important question. If, well, knowing with which campus members associate, if in October members vote, we are going to keep both campuses because we are one church with two campuses, then that's the breakdown, what people will say, how they will proceed. And this is here absolute numbers, not percentages. I can give you the percentages. So basically, 4 in 5 members, almost 4 in 5 say, I will continue. Yes, if we keep both campuses, I will continue at Lord of Life. Okay? And so that's the 171 from 219. Okay, and that's, you can see the blue slice there is about 78%, slightly bigger than three quarters. The 30 represents unsure, and in percentage terms, it's 13.7. 13.7. 13.7 say, I don't know. So if we keep both campuses, I don't feel comfortable with that, so I'm not sure, okay? And then there are about 8% of people who say, I may not continue. So they find that that might not be the right thing for Lord of Life to do, and they say, I might not continue, okay? So this is the breakdown, if we continue, possible response behavior if the congregation votes to keep both campuses. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the results here we ask, well, considering, given that you either have or don't have a primary campus, if your primary campus were to be sold, what might be your reaction? Okay, and you see here that 46.6%, top right, doesn't matter what campus, people that the average is almost half say, I may not continue. Okay, I may not continue if my primary campus is sold. And now if we look at those people who associate with Clifton and those who associate with Fairfax, then a bigger share of those who associate with Fairfax say, I may not continue or I will not continue. And that is 57%. So I may not continue at Lord of Life, that's the top answer option. I will not continue of Lord of Life, that's the last answer option. And actually a few members wrote that in. Instead of I may not continue, we chose a careful wording. They wanted to say that, no, I will not continue. And so they wrote that in. If we add those up, that's 57%. So everyone of those people who responded and said, Fairfax is my primary campus. And if this campus were to be sold, 57% say, I may or will not continue. Okay? So the comparable percentage for Clifton is 46, so a lower, but still close to half. Okay? But you see that the people who associate with Clifton, they are a bit more unsure, whereas Fairfax people, if I may use that term, they are like, well, no, I might not continue. Okay? So that's informative. Yes?
I'm told I have to stand on here, but I'm too short to stand below and get on the camera, so I'm standing up here. One thing I wanted to point out with this particular slide, we were very careful on the word may, because there are so many variables that may lead people to stay or not stay. And that was also a written comment that we got over and over and over again, was to explain the I may not stay is we don't know for sure. So I just want people to understand that a may not continue is not the same as will not continue. The few people who felt that it was important enough to make that change to our survey wrote that. And that's fine. I get that. I appreciate the definitiveness from some people. But the majority of the people, even in the category that says may not continue, many of them wrote additional comments that kind of said, well, it depends on who our pastor is. It depends on what our mission is. It depends which ministries continue. It depends on if we finish the basement. Do we... All of these variables that we just don't know. But I just wanted to provide that as an additional data point with this information that we got. So it doesn't look like, Fairfax says, heck, we sell that building, we're out of here at 55%. That's not what that number says. I just wanted to provide a little more context. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. And then, okay, so we can move on to the next slide, please. Let's skip this because it's a similar slide. Okay. Attendance pattern. We also asked you about attendance. So we have had in-person services. We have alternated them, live in-person from one campus to the next. Now we have them on both campuses. And then we also continue to offer online service. And you can look up at the more detailed table in your handout on page, here I did not put, on page 13, yes. So there you have percentages or more data. So here, just to summarize, of those people who say, I have attended in person or I attend in person, the majority attend regularly, meaning that 50% of those who attend in person do so regularly. They come either on most Sundays or they come at least twice a month, okay? We have only 15% or 1 in 6 respondents said, I have not attended in person in 2023 at all, okay? And then there's a third who come infrequently, once a month or less, okay? And then one age component there of everyone who comes regularly in person, 70, or of those who responded, 75% are age 59 and older. So again, so we just see that pattern that more senior people they feel more compelled to come. That's maybe one way to put it. Okay, and then our online attendance. So the way I summarized it is that we have a small to medium-sized share of respondents who attend online regularly. 1 in 5 say, I attend regularly, meaning most Sundays or at least twice a month. It might be their preference, it might be for health reasons, it might be for some other reasons that they prefer online worship, but they are very committed and regular participants. And then I also summarized that for the rest, online option is a backup when people are maybe out of town or sick, or they will not attend online. So 40% attend online occasionally, and then a third of the respondents said, I have not attended online. Okay. All in all, I think we still have more in-person attendance than online. But the online is a valuable backup option. Okay, so now off to Ken again.
I want to say, to start with, thank you. First to you. There we go. Short people. For filling out the survey and for taking it as seriously as you did and for giving us the data that helps inform the decision that this congregation is going to make. And before we get to the option sections, you're going to see the term we. And I want to make it very clear, the we is the royal we. It is not the PLC. It is this congregation. It's the people who are going to be voting. It's the people who are going to be online. It's going to be the people who can't come but still participate in the life of Lord of Life. This is not a PLC decision, and that's why we're very careful to try to present you data without bias into a one campus option or another. We all have our personal preferences. Of course we do. But we have to try to present the information that we've got. And on that realm, I want to say thank you to all of the members of the Parish Leadership Council who have helped work on these handouts and these slides, as well as the Data Collection Committee. And specifically, I want to call out Mike Brandos for all that he did to help us frame the issues, to help us guide the discussions. And several of the slides that Mike created are here in these slides today. And so I want to publicly thank Mike for his efforts. Before we move into the options, I want to see if there's any questions about the data that we've presented so far, or if there's additional questions. If you could come up to the microphone, up here to my left, your right, I would appreciate it. It'll help everybody to be able to answer questions. If you can't come up, that's fine. Ken, hold on a sec. We're waiting to get the hand mic on, Ken.
1, 2.
Yep, there we go.
My question is, did you get data on giving? In other words, in my mind, I'm thinking, how many more people do we need to break even or to afford, make the budget work? And that kind of revolves around what do people give on average, or do we have that kind of data?
We do not, Ken. The question was asked about the correlation between attendance, membership, and giving. And we don't, because it's so variable that an average really is kind of meaningless, because I may give $1,000 a month, for example, and 3 families who are in their 30s give $50 a month. That average really, we felt, didn't really provide any data that we thought would be helpful to the congregation. The answer is no, we don't. We probably could pull that data. Cynthia, by the way, has been a master at this, and I also want to publicly thank her and her efforts for all that she's done above and beyond her requirements as the business operation director to help us put these materials together. But we decided, Ken, that it just wasn't really helpful data to have that average information any more than we really don't have the ability to break out, well, I'm a member of Fairfax. Gail is more a member of Clifton. Are we breaking out our giving between the two? No, we don't track it that way. So we made the decision early on that that data wasn't going to be helpful because we don't track that kind of information.
I want to go back to attendance data, if I could.
Okay.
I noticed that the 12-year trend was downward, and then for 21 through 23, we had a little histogram there, a bar chart that covered it all. So my question is, what is the trend in that last 3-year data piece? In other words, do you know, can you tell me if we are increasing our attendance, or is it staying the same, or is it still continuing downward?
It's a great question, and it was one we struggled with over the last 2 meetings that the PLC had about this data, because the data for 2020, 21, and 22 was so skewed by online attendance and changes to how we counted online attendance, the occasional in-person, the flipping back and forth between campuses, then trying to bring both campuses online at the same time, with simulcast at one location and in-person here, then in-person in both, except for the sermon. And we just felt that the data, we weren't confident in the quality of the data that we had in for the COVID years of 20 through 22, to really provide any sort of picture, other than the trend down has continued. If you look at the numbers from 2019, where we were attendance-wise, it's in, I'm not sure what page of the handout that is. 5, on page 5 of the handout, that we just didn't feel, because there was a spike because of online attendance. Everybody all of a sudden started to attend online. But because there may be 3 or 4 people watching from one household at one time, or one, we weren't really sure where the data was going to come out. We decided that it just wasn't helpful. The 2023 numbers reflect the fact that we're back in person. And so I think that's where you kind of got that break, but the numbers are still going down. Though we've kind of stabilized since we have gone back to services in both campuses with the simulcast sermon. They have kind of stabilized and have started to go back up. We plateaued a little in the last month, so as we used to say, bring a friend. But we had been pretty steady and growing before that. Sandy.
So I'm
closer to the mic.
I'm absolutely in awe of what the pastors, the PLC, the visioning, and financial and data committees have done. So I hate to ask for anything else. I know you're working many hours a night, several times a week. But I was wondering, would it be helpful when I look at the summary between the 2 campuses? Would it be helpful to know the cost of? So this would kind of be bringing each campus up to where the other one is. In Fairfax, you'd need to update the kitchen and I guess add a sprinkler system. That was noted in Clifton. But at Clifton, you would need to finish the whole basement. I wonder if it would be helpful before we vote to have information about the cost of those options.
No, we don't have time to put that together. That in and of itself, Sandy, is going to require us to hire architects. We'll have to hire engineering firms. We'll need to figure out what it takes to bring us up to code. While I agree that that is an important point, because let's be honest, it's going to be more expensive than we hope, but I don't have time between now and October 22nd. Remember when I started my conversation that we're not going to have all the data that you want? That's unfortunately an example of one of the data points we won't have, but that is one of the conversations when we move into the next portion that I want to talk about, are some of those things that, depending on what we decide to do, what do we need to do to the remaining campus? Yes, come on up, Linda.
I echo all the comments about all the work that went into this. I greatly, greatly appreciate this. This is tremendous. I just have a simple question. I look at the attendance trends and the downward cycle, My question is more reflective of how many members we have in the church. The data says we have 444 members.
444 households.
Households, excuse me. Thank you for that correction. For 2022, do we have any, we're now 9 months into 2023. Is that staying pretty steady, or have we dropped? Because we only got, of the respondents, like half of the households that responded to the survey. So I was just curious. I think that would be helpful information when we're looking at number of households that are contributing to the bottom line. Can we make up the deficit? Can't we? But again, I'm digressing.
It's okay.
I would like an update maybe on how many households we currently have.
So do we. So you're not alone on that question. We have found that the database that our membership numbers came from was not as complete and accurate as that we would have liked. And so the data numbers are fluctuating, where the leadership is, the staff is working to clean up that database to get a more realistic idea of what our membership is. It is lower than even the 903 baptized and confirmed, because it hadn't been adjusted and updated in as often as it should have. And so I know Pastor has been working with the staff to try to go through, along with Ken Vanderhorst, to work through, to remove members who are no longer here, to make sure that we're getting new members, the new members are added to the list. That I'm not worried about. And the answer to that second question is yes, we are. Ken is hosting quarterly, I think, prospective members dinners here at Clifton, and we've been averaging 6, 7, 8 people per quarter who have expressed an interest in joining. I don't know that all of them have joined, but we're slowly rebuilding that program as we bring new people in. Kind of like what old Pastor Nathan used to do with kind of what does it mean, Lutheran 101, to help with new members. Something similar to that is what Ken Vanderhorst has put together for the membership. But the numbers, we don't have anything updated. We may have something, but I don't want to make any promises that we'll have more accurate 2023 data before October.
Right, and I understand that, but going forward, since we're now projecting having to pay another 11,000, 12,000 per month beginning in March, for our mortgage, that would be helpful to know.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, and again, thank you, PLC. Appreciate it.
Are there any other questions? Gail? It's not working. It just.
Page 4 in the handout, mortgage information. Page 4 in the handout, mortgage information. This was stunning to me as a PLC member. Could you explain the balloon payment of 2033, please? What is that? What does that mean for us?
In 2033? Okay, so if everyone can turn to page 4, which is everyone's favorite type of amortization schedule. And I know Doug Vegan's gonna cringe when I even use that term, because that's not what this is, but something similar. If you take a look at 2023, you'll see the annual payment is $230,000. $31,000 of that is going to be interest, and $199,000 is principal, for a monthly payment of $38,000, the same as it's for the prior 9 years, until June. Then come July 1st, that's the biggie. On July 1st, this church will owe $1.36 million as a balloon payment, which is the $57,000 of interest that Cadre talked about that had been deferred during the summer of 2020, plus the remaining principal on the mortgage, which is $1.3 million. So that means that the congregation has to write a check, virtually, not literally, well, maybe literally, on July 1st for $1.36 million to pay off the remaining portion of the mortgage. That's what that statement is showing. Or, as Ken just said, you know, when you get down to that point and you're down to $1.25 million, perhaps we're at the point where we can refinance and deal with that smaller amount. Because Doug had mentioned that he had talked to Thrive, and they're willing to work with us. They just got to see that there's movement on our part to pay down the debt in a timely fashion, in a consistent fashion. But I think if we got down to that amount, we'd probably be able to refinance. Doug, is that a fair statement? Yeah. Okay. Doug says yes. So what Doug says is the $1.3 million principal is pretty much the deferred principal that we haven't paid since we got the forbearance from Thrivent of the $11,000 a month principal that we haven't had to pay. So that's about where that amount comes from. I see Craig coming up, so I'll open it up to any other questions while he walks up front. Is there any other questions? Come on up. It's great.
Going back to the survey that you gathered, are there any data in our own survey or anecdotally in the congregation or objectively across ELCA and other churches that would support or help us understand, are people leaving the church physically, like in terms of coming to church? And are they attending online? In other words, is online replacing in-person attendance generally? Or are people simply, those downward trends are simply people no longer connected or were members that are leaving outright?
Unfortunately, it's the latter. They're becoming disconnected from the church completely. There is some online, but it's not making up nearly the numbers that are coming, that are peeling away from the church. I think an interesting data point was that of the respondents was that 75% of the almost weekly attendance are people that are 59 and older. That's an interesting data point, and that's not surprising, given that's the group, and my group, younger than that, in our early 50s, that's what we did with church in the 70s and 80s. We're seeing younger families just are not as able to be engaged. I mean, we've got several families, though, that are engaged in the church that are exclusively online because of personal issues, trying to play soccer mom, literally and figuratively, on Sunday mornings, that makes it difficult for them to come. But that is an ELCA-wide trend. It is not just Lord of Life, and it's not even just ELCA. It's pretty much every Protestant denomination across the board is seeing between 35 and 55% reductions in attendance over the last 10, 15 years. And that obviously long predates the idea of online worship.
And are there reasons, are there data that support the reasons behind that? Why are people not participating, attending church anymore?
A lot of people, from the stuff that I have seen and I've read, is that most people don't feel connected to a church anymore. They're just becoming unchurched. There's a lot of, as the society becomes more secularized, people are finding their communities elsewhere. It's no longer church. Their friend group, so to speak, isn't the church. They're not finding what they need here. Now, that's not necessarily to say the non-denominational churches. I mean, you look at Burke Community, you look at, I never get the church right, the one that's on Burke, Expectation. Those churches are growing. But those churches are very much geared to all sorts of ministries, financial, youth programs with daycare programs, social counseling. They're more about stuff, and I don't mean that in a pejorative manner, I know that came across wrong, that they're not as, because they're non-denominational, they're very much more personality driven by their pastor leadership, and they have seen growth, but the mainline denominations, to include Catholicism, have not, and a lot of it, I think, is coming down to people just, they're not as feeling connected to the church anymore. As the society has become more secular, attendance has gone like that.
So do those trends and our data and our anecdotal experience inform what our congregation needs to aim towards, both in terms of the physical facilities that we're concerned about and the programs that they address?
I think it does. Yeah, I think it absolutely does. Yeah, Mike, maybe Mike may be able to answer a little bit. Mike helped us, as I said earlier, with the data collection.
Yeah, and I realize you don't want comments, but
Your comment is okay, because you're actually with data committee, so I'm good with that.
okay, attendance, membership, in particular, this is impacting the youngest generation, Gen Z, Gen Y. They're basically giving up on the church, except there are exceptions, and it's built on relationships. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for relationships. They don't feel a denominational loyalty, and so on. And I've been looking at data from the George Barna group. If you're not familiar with it, they collect statistical data, and they've been doing this for decades. And there's whole reports out. I just got one for Gen Z. So yes, there are things we can do. If you look back at our dip in where our membership is, it's particularly in that 20 to 45 age group. And that, if you really want to make a difference, we've got to focus on that. And if, how am I going to say this? If you think about more than 50% of our membership is over the age of 50. They're past the childbearing years. Right now, a quarter of our membership is under the age of 20. They're not having kids. So 25% of our membership right now is, if you will, childbearing age. It's not likely that we're going to have a lot of internal growth from people having babies. We have got to expand our horizons, reach out beyond us, and implement programs, if you will, that particularly are of benefit and meaningful relationships for that younger adult group.
Great, thanks, Mike. Go ahead, come on up.
Thank you. Yeah, 3 simple questions. One, if we meet the challenge that is currently underway, what will that do to the big picture? Second, it seems to me that we need to know what Raise Point's going to do before we vote. Will we have that kind of data? Third question, how can I vote? I'm not going to be here. Traveling in the airport, access to internet's even going to be touchy. Can we vote before we leave?
We hadn't talked about that last part. That was a fair amount of our discussion at the PLC meeting on Monday, was how to conduct the vote, which you would think that would be an easy question, but it's not when we're trying to think through the logistics. So what we'll do is we'll try to figure that out. I don't know that we can do early voting under our Constitution. Actually, Mary Grace, who is our secretary, is saying that we don't have the ability because you have to be present at the meeting to be able to vote. We just last year updated that to allow for online voting and attendance through online. So unfortunately, the best option I can say is, hopefully you've got decent Wi-Fi at the airport to try to dial in, and I'm not trying to be flippant with that response. Unfortunately, it's the best answer I can give given the way our Constitution is drafted. As to your first question about what is the challenge due to our big picture, The big picture, it really doesn't affect it. And by the big picture, I'm using that term between now and 3 and 4 years from now. What the challenge grant has done is it has allowed us to close this year's operating budget deficit. And that's it. It's a one-time offer that will help close our budget deficit. You saw the numbers from Cadre. It was $36,000 was about what we were projecting as a deficit. And remember, two months ago when I came up here and Cadre said it was about 200,000. We've been able to cut some costs. We've been able to increase some giving. We're at about $36,000 once we get the full grant, if we're only $8,000 away, so $4,000 from additional giving by members. We're now down to about $15,000. But what that does is that allows us to close the gap this year and still pay our benevolence. But we've still cut back on the second pastor. We still haven't filled our Arlene Dark's outreach position. We don't have Pastor Joe's position filled. We don't have a full-time youth leader. So there are some positions that we've chosen not to fill in order to address the budget. And even with those additional cuts, we're still running a small deficit. As I think it was Linda that said it, the key is that come March of next year, we're up another $11,000 in expenses a month. So almost $120,000 a year. So the challenge, while great and wonderfully helpful for this year to help address some of the short-term concerns, the big picture argument, I would say it really doesn't affect that. Unless we can turn everybody's additional givings into permanent givings, that they increase their giving in future years. And I have to be realistic to know that not every family can afford to do that. Now, Greg, I'm sorry, I forgot on your middle question.
Grace Point.
The Grace Point proposal. Yes, Grace Point has changed a little bit where they're looking. They are not considering really at this point. What I can share is that they're not really looking to increase the amount of space that they want to use at Fairfax. They are still in the process of reassessing how they want to operate as a ministry, which is now called Acts 2. They went through a rebranding about 3 weeks ago. They are now called Acts 2. And so they're trying to figure out how they want to operate. It appears that their mission here in the DMV is going to serve as their hub location for their entire Eastern Seaboard ministries, from Boston all the way down to South Carolina. And that they may want an actual facility that they can call their own versus portion of a facility. So for the remainder of the year, we don't see much increase. They have increased, I think, a little bit of their rentals. Pastor, is that the case? I think they've increased some.
It's been steady with what they used to.
Okay, so I stand corrected. It's been consistent with the amount of rental that they've been using up to this point. So what I can say for the congregation is at this point, we can't count on anything additional from Grace Point. And as Grace Point looks at their options, they may come back to us, depending on what our vote is next month. We may have, there may be other options at that point. For now, they've reconsidered what they're looking for, and they've decided that the option of just using portions of the top floor of Fairfax wasn't going to meet their needs. So they're just going to continue leasing as they've been, renting space as they've been doing it. Is there any other questions before I move to the options? Yes, come on up.
I guess you said membership decree, went down, and some of the family unchurched. But I knew at least 6 family, all friends went to abiding presence, so they did not go to church anymore, but they went to different church. I know some couple other family went to different church, so I just want to clarify.
And one of the struggles with families that we have heard is it is a bit of a strain to be able to going back and forth with Journey, not being at both locations. I'd love to have Journey at both locations, but I need more teachers. If I can get more teachers, I can have Journey at both campuses like we used to do. And that's a big deal because families come because of their kids. At least we came to church because that was always what we were doing, but we always brought our kids. And if they didn't have a journey, Sunday, let's call it Sunday school, Ari and I wouldn't have gone to that church. And so that's where it's a little bit of a challenge, that if we can get help for Alicia to get additional teachers, we can look to have a journey at both campuses again. And I think that would get to some of the point that you were talking about. Alex.
Got some questions from online.
Please.
So Terry asks, are there other options for renting out spaces or having another church sharing our space?
We don't have any other churches that are interested in renting a space. We've looked at options to try to continue to increase rental, but when you look across, we rent a lot of our spaces a lot of the time as it is. It's where the real struggle is, it's underneath where I'm standing right now. The fact that I've got 17,000 square feet that I can't use because we haven't been able to build out the basement. And that's a challenge when we're trying to get additional rental.
And another question, would Grace Point / Acts 2 want to buy one of our buildings if we decided to sell?
They may. They may. And that's all, I can't be any more specific than that. They may. At some point, that is an open question. Any other questions on data or the survey before I move into the options? Kadre.
If there are no more questions on this section, and before we move on to the next one, then I just wanted to acknowledge some more people who have been of tremendous help in collecting all of the data and putting it together. Mike Prondos was already mentioned. Can you mention Mike Prondos? I would also like to thank Marlene Krause, who was of huge help in reaching out to many of our ministries. Not all of the data that we have collected has made it into the handout, or we have analyzed and put it together yet, but Marlene was of huge help reaching out to many ministries, and now we have an inventory. What ministries are active, how many members, where do they meet? And we are still working on that, so a big thank you to Marlene. And then also, I wanted to thank the staff for a very quick turnaround for our survey. So we don't always have the luxury of time to plan our work ahead, the PLC I mean, but once we had the survey together, then the staff was extremely helpful and turned it around very quickly. Printed it out, laid it out online, get it ready to be mailed and distributed digitally. So that was of huge help. So great support from the staff.
Then I'm going to move on to the options slide. Well, this pretty much is the options. Any questions? I think we're done. Oh, wait. These really are the options. Remember last month when we first presented the options to you, we gave you 3. I had enough people come up to me afterward, and the PLC reconsidered, and we added a 4th one that we had considered, but it decided not to present, and add it back on, and that was the one to put both campuses on the market and let the market dictate which facility could potentially be sold, depending on a whole host of decisions that we would need to make and factors. So we decided to add that option back in. So, slide. All right, so what I want to, after that, I want to start very quickly with a decision to put either campus, one campus, both campuses on, does not mean we have to sell. Let me re-say that. If we list the campus, it does not mean we are required to sell. Even if we have a listing agreement with a real estate agent, which we will have if we make that decision to go down that road, we are not obligated to sell. So if we get an increase in attendance, we get an increase in monthly giving, we get an increase in volunteers, we have a plan together to make repairs or to do modifications to the facilities that are left, and we make it work, we can always pull the campus off the market before we sell. And let me make that second point very clear. This is not a decision next month to sell a campus. This isn't the meeting next month is to make a decision as to whether or not to list a campus, both campuses, or keep both. There will need to be a separate vote to decide, once an offer comes in, whether to accept or to reject that offer. That will be a separate vote at some later point. And I also, as talking to Doug Vegan and Kurt Mattingly, I want to make it, I think there may be a perception that if we list, we're going to have offers by the weekend. This is not your selling of your home. That's not the way this works. It could be months, it could be years before you get an offer, because it's just so unique to try to sell our church that it is not even traditional commercial real estate. It's church real estate, which is different. So I just want to make sure with those 2 points in background as we go through the options. So next slide. So the first option is to keep both campuses and then focus on growth. What does this look like? Well, I hate the word the business as usual or the status quo, because I've told you we won't have a status quo. This isn't status quo because of the last 3 words in the title. Focus on growth. We need to explore new ways to generate income needed to address the shortfalls and prepare for the 2033 balloon payment. We need to, in whatever plan that we come up with after October, because, oh, by the way, you thought forms were done in October? Surprise, they're not done, because we need to figure out what our ministry is going to look like once we make the decision and then implement that. Because we have to implement the plan. We can't wait for another 15 years to decide what are we going to do with the basement. Or if we keep Fairfax, what are we going to do with the kitchen, the roof, other things that we need to work on. Because we have too much untapped potential to leave it sitting. And we can't make both campuses work unless we have a plan to grow ministry, to grow attendance, grow giving, and grow ministries. But if that's the church's decision, absolutely we'll support it. But we need to make a commitment here and now, and in October and going forward, that we actually have to implement the plan that we're going to create for ministry. Slide. If we put either or both campuses on the market, we have to agree on a plan for ministry growth and leadership, what we have to commit to. So that doesn't change if we put either or both campuses on the market. But what will this actually look like? We'll have to enter an agreement with a broker to list the facilities. The operations at the listed or listeds facilities will continue to include the preschool and will continue normally. That's not going to change if we put the home on the market. This, again, is not like your house where you have to have it constantly staged and ready to go in case someone comes and calls the realtor and they want to come visit your house 15 minutes later. That's not what we're talking about here. So we will continue our operations. The Lord of Life staff will continue to work with the broker to schedule walkthroughs that are as least disruptive as possible. And then if a viable offer is received, the decision to sell a campus would require an additional congressional vote after conversation and discussion. Slide. For all of the options, we need to increase attendance and engagement at both campuses. And attendance does not equal giving. I know there's a thought that if I just increase the attendance, I'm going to increase giving. That's not necessarily the case. Because as Mike Brondo said, that group of 20 to 49-year-olds may not be able to give a lot of money at this time. They may be able to volunteer their time because their kids are in Sunday school, so they're able to help. That's what a lot of young families do. They make their donations in other ways. So I just want to make it, it's clear that obviously we need to increase attendance, but that won't automatically translate to an increase in giving. But we need both. We need to recruit and mobilize members to increase the volunteer pool. If you look around on any given Sunday, generally it's fairly similar faces that you see all the time helping. We need to grow that volunteer pool if we're going to make this work for all of the options, whether we list one campus, list both campuses, or keep both campuses. We also have to commit to increase our income to meet the annual operating budget. As was asked earlier, does this help the overall big picture, the donation that we got for the matching gift? And the answer is it helps short term, but it doesn't address 2024, 2025, 2026. We have to increase our income to meet that operating budget and the increase in mortgage principal payments are going to come. And the last point that I want to make on this slide is that last bullet there, that we have to continue to pay the mortgage and increase principal starting in March of 24, in the words you don't see there, until a building is sold. Just because we list something doesn't mean we're out of having to pay our expenses. We still have to continue to do that. And when we talk about our cash reserve, we're talking about the PLC had a continuing resolution that we added to the Constitution that says that we're to seek to ensure that we've got a cash reserve of 2 months of budgeted income. And right now, roughly, we have about $277,000 in that, what I'm calling cash reserve. It's not a separate fund. It's not, you won't see it listed on the line item of a reserve fund. It's just the undesignated funds that we've got that we can use to pay for expenses. Our required monthly income is about $136,000 a month. That includes the annual principal payment before it goes up in March of next year. So we're roughly at that 2-month cushion that we want. But 2 months can go pretty quick when Cadre had said that for the last several years, we've had $100,000 deficits each year. Well, you can imagine it's not going to take long to exhaust a $270,000. It will take 2 years to exhaust that if we were to continue to run that kind of deficit. Now, fortunately, this year, I think we're going to be, if people continue to give, as they have pledged, we won't have that same issue this year, but we will have to address it next year. Next slide. If either campus is sold after a decision and a vote of this congregation, ministries, worship, and staff will move to the remaining campus. We will work with our members to help those who are shifting from their primary campus to that campus that we have elected to retain. If the Clifton campus is sold, we should consider renovating parts of the Fairfax campus. I'm not sure who said it, but they stole my thunder, so thank you, about needing to redo the kitchen. How many people realize that at the Fairfax campus kitchen, you can't, legally, you're not supposed to cook in there? Yeah, several people did. I didn't think I knew that, but some of the older members knew that that's actually a restriction. It is only supposed to be used for reheating. Do churches like ours and every church violate that? I'm not going to say because I'm on camera and being recorded, but we would need to look to try to redo that kitchen to make it into a commercial-grade kitchen. If Fairfax is sold, then some ministries may not be able to meet at the Clifton campus short-term because of the space constraints, because of the preschool in the back, the one set of bathrooms, and our undeveloped, unfinished real estate below where I'm standing right now. And that we need to prepare to finish the Clifton basement, and we need to not just prepare, we need to plan. That would be, Sandy, where we would really get down to the nuts and bolts of what does that look like? What ministries do we want to accomplish? What is the preschool going to be the majority of it? Is what portion can be added to the preschool? These are all questions that we would need to decide at that point that we just aren't able to do before October. The preschool will have to close at the sold campus according to the timeline defined in the sales agreement. What do I mean by that? What I would mean is that we would put a contingency clause, any sort of sales agreement, to allow the school to finish out their school year to whenever the sale would be. And I've talked to several people who have sold real estate, commercial real estate. Those kind of contingencies are not uncommon. So those won't necessarily scare off potential buyers because those things, they know that those are a common occurrence with real estate. If we sell a campus, the other thing that's on here, if we sell a campus, is it's going to free up a fair amount of potential resources financially. Because, well, it depends, of course, on what we get. I mean, if we got $5 million for whichever facility we sold, that's enough to pay off the mortgage. We save we don't save $36,000 every month that we no longer have to pay. So that's money that can be redirected to ministries or to improvements to the remaining facility. but it won't be the same. But I did want to say, and that, by the way, the $5 million number is just some random number I picked. I don't have anything to back that up. We don't have an idea of numbers. As Kurt Mattingly and Doug Vegan have reminded me on multiple occasions, what we think this facility or the Fairfax facility is worth is almost irrelevant, because it's a question of what does the market think it's worth. And that's going to be based on offers that we receive. So we may think that we should get $10 million for this facility. Great, I'd love to win the lottery too, but that may not be a realistic outcome. But I just want people to be aware that if we do sell a campus, that is one of the things that we will be able to address, is that sort of Damocles, as I said earlier. We will no longer be number one on the debt ratio, the amount of debt that we were on that slide that you saw presented earlier. Next slide. So in summary, we are a vibrant ELCA congregation whose mission is to love God, love people, and make disciples. Both pastors have said that they are going to stay until, for Pastor Lanny, until our new lead pastor is in sight, whenever he or she is in sight. Pastor Shannon has said she's going to stay until we make a decision as to what we do with an associate pastor. They wouldn't stay unless there was a reason for them to stay. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn for either of them, who have communicated to the PLC, and I think to many of you, that they see the upward trend in engagement by this congregation at both campuses.
Amen.
Okay, that's my confirmation. Our challenge is to resolve the Lord of Life's financial shortfall, stay true to our mission, strengthen our mission and our faith community. And that each of the options requires to come together as one church and trust in the Holy Spirit. We need to make this decision based on that guidance, not fear, not worry, but on what is the Holy Spirit leading us to do as a congregation. And I ask that that always be in the back of your mind when you're talking with each other, when you're thinking about this, when you're reading the data, when you want to communicate to us, because we're going to have table sessions on the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th at each campus, each Sunday, where members of the PLC and pastors will be available to answer questions and to do the tours, as Gail said, for those who may not be as familiar with the facilities. And so with that, I want to open the floor up to questions on this last portion of the presentation. Looks like I've got someone coming up, so we'll just wait a second.
I have a couple questions about the mechanics of the vote next month.
So do we.
So, two questions really. One, there's been some previous discussion about, usually we just do a raise your hands or a voice vote. If that's the plan, or if it'll be some sort of ballot with choices on it. And second, usually we're just voting yes or no on something, and this has 4 choices. Is it a plurality wins? Is it going to rank choice? Or
I'll start with the first question first. The answer is no. We're going to go ahead. We'll put a motion on the floor, because you have to under Robert's rules, to request a paper ballot. And we're just going to go ahead and do that right off the bat. Because this is too hard to do. I mean, even if this were non-controversial, and I realize it is controversial. To get to your second point, Jeff, it's the 4 options, and okay, am I counting heads with the yeas? Is this like Congress? Whoever screams the loudest wins? That's not what we're looking at. To answer the second question, no, it is not a plurality. The Constitution requires that it must be a majority plus 1 on any vote. So what we are considering, and the PLC is working on trying to figure out how to do this mechanically, is to put the 4 options together. If one option gets 50% plus 1 of the voting, of the members present and those voting. So it's based on the votes, and it'll be both online and in person. If that first ballot results in a majority answer, we've got our answer. If the answer isn't, then we're trying to figure out, okay, do we eliminate the bottom decision, that got the least number of votes? Can we eliminate the bottom 2 decisions? We're looking into that through Robert's rules, is to make sure that we follow that procedure and then do a second ballot. So it may take, I'm just warning people now, it may take 2 or 3 ballots to get the answer the congregation has come to the decision on. But that's I realize that's as clear as mud, but that's as best as I can do right now is the PLC is working through those exact logistics, Jeff. Yes, Mike?
This is a question for all of you. My sister and brother-in-law's church in Richmond are in a group of 10 churches, and they recently had a forum or a workshop, if you will, for the churches in their group. And they are dealing, 8 of the 10 churches basically in their group are not really viable. They're dealing with the same questions, and they brought in an outside speaker from Seattle. And he specifically is addressing the question, how do we monetize our churches so that they, in turn, will support ministry? So my question to you, because you've got a lot of good, hardworking brains out there, if you've got any ideas, creative ideas, how to monetize what we do. I mean, I've got a list of 40 fundraising projects, but maybe you've got something even better, you know, beyond just renting facilities. Give us your ideas, okay? And we'll see if we can put them into action.
I appreciate that, Mike. The one thing I'd like to piggyback on the back of that, and maybe a little different spin, Mike, than what you said. The church is not a building. It is not a facility. It is us. It is the mission. It's the ministries that we do. It's the outreach that we do. It's the people that we don't know that we're affecting, because you plant the seed and it may grow 5 years later down the road and with 2 congregations later. And so I just want you to keep that in mind, realizing that a lot of what's driving this, most of what's driving this is financial, and I get it. We can't get away from money unless somebody wins the lottery, and that's not a plan. We are more than a building. We need to figure out how to make it work with whatever that looks like in the future. So that's actually a great lead into my last slide, which is what happens now. I ask you all to each carefully review the data handout that we provided in Lifelines. Our goal is to get, and I hope to get it out this Friday, but I am not going to make any ironclad guarantees that we're going to try to provide you summary of the written comments, because you wrote a lot. Thank you. We appreciate that. We're trying to summarize a lot of that. Please discuss the options with each other. Get together with people, like-minded people, or people you don't even know, and talk about these options and what do you see for the future of Lord of Life. Then pray over those options. Participate in the table talks and the campus tours are going to come up that I had mentioned earlier on the 1st, 8th, and 15th at noon at both campuses. Be prepared to implement whatever plan we come up with in October through ministry, volunteering, giving, and figuring out what is our future, what is that going to look like. And then finally, and it kind of goes without saying, please attend the special congregational meeting that will be here at 11 on October 22nd and vote. And realize that we will have the option online, because I know there will be people that won't be able to attend in person. And with that, I will ask if there's any final comments before we ask Pastor to close us in prayer. Hand out, Mike. Okay. Pastor, do you mind?
Yes. I'll go to the mic.
Next slide.
Let's stand. Loving God, we've gathered here in your name to do your work with the resources that you've given to us. You have been very generous. You have reached out in your mission to save the world. Allow us to see how we can likewise be in your mission and we can share the gifts that you've given to us. Give us a month of holy conversation, of learning, praying, discussing, and discerning your future for this congregation and these buildings. We ask that you allow us to be calm and to trust you and to discern your Holy Spirit's movement amongst us and for our future. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone.